Thanks for joining me on episode 403 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Shannon Miles from Belay. I challenge you to discover your calling and find your third option so you can be empowered to live every day to the fullest. One way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
The neuroplasticity of the brain, the way it forms and reforms connections. See, we used to think that the brain kind of formed early in life and then was permanently structured that way forever and ever and ever. But we've discovered that that's actually not true. The brain is constantly wiring and rewiring itself as you go through life.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about investing in others by stewarding your time, I talk with you about why you go where you look holds true for more than just sports, why this isn't magic or something like The Secret. It simply has to do with the neuroplasticity of the brain. And I share this is why your where is as important as your what when you're looking to better steward your time.
As we talk about stewarding your time, wouldn't it be great if you could support this podcast and do it without just taking too long? Turns out you can. All you have to do is use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon when you're ready to make a purchase via Amazon, and a small commission will come back to support the show just that quick. If you enjoy the show when you are ready to buy from Amazon, just use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon.
One of the expressions that I heard whenever I was a kid growing up is this idea of you go where you look. Now, it actually was shared with me in reference to throwing a frisbee and the idea of when you throw a frisbee to someone, you want to look at where you're throwing it, not down at the frisbee, but look at the person that you're throwing it to. And by doing that, the frisbee is more likely to go in that direction. I heard it later in my life whenever I was learning to ski, and this idea again of don't look down at the skis below your feet, but rather look down the hill towards where you want to go, that you go where you look. I've heard it expressed to others in football and baseball and all sorts of different sporting events. This idea of where our head goes, we kind of follow along. We point our eyes in a direction and we go that direction. We point our head in a direction and we go that direction. I mean, even if you think about something like the bridle on a horse, that's sort of the point behind the bridle. As you turn the horse's head and the horse's head goes a certain direction, the horse naturally turns and goes in that direction. But this idea of you go where you look holds true for other areas of your life as well. You know, have you ever had the experience of you suddenly start focusing on something a certain way, and all of a sudden that sort of message begins to resonate and show up over and over and over again? It could be something like you purchase a new car, and all of a sudden everyone is driving on the street with that car. It could be something like you focus on a problem, and all of a sudden, everything in your life seems to be a problem. Or you focus on an opportunity, and suddenly everything in your life seems to be an opportunity. The truth is, the way our attention goes has a tendency to start reinforcing the very thing that we're paying attention to. It's one of the reasons that self-talk and the way we share with ourselves becomes very important. But equally, it has to do with how we present to others, how we interact and talk to others. You know, if all we ever do is talk about the negatives in our life, then that becomes reinforcing. The people around us begin to talk about and see their own negatives. They begin to share their own negatives. And then everybody is seeing nothing but the downside, nothing but the negative. And the entire group begins to go that direction. This isn't magic. This isn't about the secret, that, the idea of if you speak it into the universe, then that comes back to you. This is really about the neurobiology of the way we as human beings are out there doing things. Because we as human beings begin to have channels in our brain, the neurochemicals in our brain and the nerves of our brain begin to make connections to each other. And you can almost picture it like a river running through a riverbed in a valley. The more that you travel down the same path, the deeper that those ruts get into the road, or the deeper the river carves its way through the valley. The same thing happens in your brain. The more you think and see and focus on certain things, the stronger those connections get, and the more likely they begin to repeat themselves. So it is true that what you pay attention to in your brain begins to reinforce itself and begins to reoccur over and over and over again. That's one of the reasons that forming habits and routines becomes so important, because a habit can work for you or it can work against you depending on what kind of habits and routines you put into your life, what you've structured in your life. The neuroplasticity of the brain, the way it forms and reforms connections. See, we used to think that the brain kind of formed early in life and then was permanently structured that way forever and ever and ever. But we've discovered that that's actually not true. The brain is constantly wiring and rewiring itself as you go through life. Your brain is actually reprogramming as you go. And this is why the things that happen to you affect your biology. And what's more, the most important part of it is not what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens to you. And realize that you have some autonomy. You have the ability to choose that response in many ways. This is why it's not just about what you do, it's also about where and how you do it. I talk about environment a lot when I'm talking about productivity, which sounds funny because, at first glance, you're like, well, what do you mean the environment? How does that affect me? But see, what you see around you reinforces the channels in your brain. Have you ever had the problem of not being able to remember something? You thought about something, you were going to go do it, then you leave the room and you go down the hall, and all of a sudden you can't remember what it was you were going to do? And then you go back to the room where you originally thought of it, and boom, it comes to you immediately. You suddenly think of it. That's actually has to do with that environmental cue. You are a visual creature. The environment that you operate in affects your productivity. And this is true for everyone around you too. So if you want to help other people steward their time, you also need to be aware of the environment that they're operating in and the environment that you're creating for them to operate in. If you want to be a better steward of your own time, you need to be aware of the environment that you're operating in. A mess being around you can affect your productivity. Creating visual cues of place and time, where every time I'm in this place at this time, I do this thing. That's routine and habit. And it reinforces this idea of you go where you look. The look part of this is important. The cues that you have around you, the visual ideas. Is the room that you work in neat? Is it clean? Is it pretty? Does it have things that remind you of why you're doing the things that you're doing? That could be pictures of your family. That could be pictures of a brand new house. That could be whatever. Pictures of the clients that you work with. It's one of the reasons I love working with clients and having them on video, is that visual cue of them seeing my face and me seeing their face allows them to better connect with the message that we're working through with coaching. So you want to think about it when you're working with others as well. What is the environment and what is the message that you're sending with the words that you speak, the direction that you point, and how you look affects where you go. You get what you focus on. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of time, be sure to sign up for our Stewardship of Time Tips series by going to inspiredstewardship.com/time or texting 44222 time tips, and that'll get you our best tips on stewarding your time. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.